Hi guys, welcome to Robin Hood Diaries today. Glad you're with me. Lot to unpack today. I previewed, oh God, you guys, you know me with my previews. Something, oh, help me out here. Occult, it was just the occult, it referenced occult, me, Hollywood, some people. Okay, let's just leave it there. Let me put into context the subject, and then let me identify, let's say, 4 of the key players in this little story. And then, of course, we'll get into how Sean was sitting right in the middle of it. The occult and Hollywood have gone hand in hand for many, many, many years, more than you may imagine. All the way back to the silent picture days, Mary Miles Minter, all these old filmmakers and movie stars dabbled in the occult. You can, let's just not Wikipedia war this. I'm going from what I know. So, key player number 1, of course, that I did not know, is a gentleman by the name of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was an occultist, but he was a philosopher, and he was an author, and sort of a patriarch of sorts, of what could, I guess, be called a movement of sorts. This is the occult. Now, let's not sort of confuse this with maybe some of our impressions or interpretations of the occult or occultism. In the 70s, occultism kind of whirled around into this, like, you know, by the 80s, there was like, you know, killer teenagers doing, you know, human sacrifices out in East Lansing, Michigan, or whatever. That is, it was very much played up as Satanism, okay? Occult and occultism and Satanism are really not hand in hand, but Hollywood, many in Hollywood were hand in glove with the occult. No offense to modern Satanists, but look, if you haven't read Aleister Crowley, let alone know who he was, please turn me off. Okay, skip this episode, because you are call yourself whatever you want, okay? Satanism is not a religion. It, I suppose, could be considered a cult, but it is not occultism or traditional occultism or the occult. That's Satanism. Let me tell you, kids, with a minor in world religion, Satan did not want to be worshipped. All he wanted was your everlasting soul. Your worship could, you know, he'd crap on your worship, okay? He really doesn't care. So it's really, you know, it's not that, okay? But it is an arena. It's a philosophy. It is scribes. It's followings. It's all sorts of things wrapped into one that cannot be called a religion per se. So let's really not confuse those two. The fascination with the occult, and then I'll get into the players here. Again, like I said, goes way back deep into Hollywood. There are numerous stars, directors, you name it, who were or were have rumored to have been occultists or absorbed in the occult, or fascinated by the occult. So Aleister Crowley was the father of much of modern occult. Here's the players. Okay, so there was a guy named Kenneth Anger, who was a film director, who's a notorious, legendary, maverick, beyond maverick filmmaker, like him or not, because he was an occultist, for damn sure. I think he had, I don't know, he had Satan actually tattooed across his chest, but whatever. I knew him, as did anyone worth their salt in Hollywood, or anyone who knows of Hollywood will remember his book, Hollywood Babylon. It's a notorious book full of all kinds of dish, both real and imagined, and it's kind of what put him on his comeback map. But his original map was with films like Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, Scorpio Rising. These were very, very, very weird, very colorful, bizarre short films by and large. They weren't all occulty, but his movies were friggin' weird, okay? But they were masterpieces. So that's Kenneth Anger, bona fide occultist. I mean, he could, you know, he was like Aleister Crowley, and then like, you know, you whittle it down to like, you know, I don't know, Southern California, and then there's Kenneth Anger, the director. Now, on a par with his notoriety was a gentleman by the name of SAMSON de BRIER. SAMSON de BRIER, much like Kenneth Anger, came from old Hollywood. Kenneth Anger actually was featured in the silent Midsummer Night's Dream. SAMSON de BRIER was featured in the 1922 version of Salome. So I don't know, you know, I guess that just, you know, serves to show that they are of the same generation, let's say, but within the same milieu of early Hollywood. So now let's come out of that. Okay, we've got Kenneth Anger, we've got SAMSON de BRIER. Kenneth Anger goes on and becomes sort of a cause celeb, then dives right into very serious filmmaking. And that takes up his time for much time. And then, you know, like I said, then he writes Hollywood Babylon. He becomes, you know, a notorious figure. ANAԻS Nin, who is also very famous writer, French writer, I believe, originally, starred in inauguration of the Pleasure Dome and several of Kenneth's films. But she, in and of herself, was a brilliant writer. Now I'm saying these things because these are the people I knew. Okay, so Samson went on, unlike Anger, to make films. Samson was in Kenneth Anger's films. He starred in, I don't know, maybe all of them? Or no, 3/4 of them? A good 3/4 of them. There weren't that many, but Samson starred in them. They weren't linear. They were not like stories. They were like dreams, like fantasy dreams, and Samson was in many of them. So Samson, and we're talking the 50s, okay? So in and around this time, with Hollywood's fascination with the occult, we have people like Jimmy Dean and Jack Nicholson and Marlon Brando and many famous actresses and intellectuals congregating around Samson in his salon, as they used to say, places where intellectuals hung out and just talked. And his was in Hollywood. He owned the property and he rented the front house out to Kenneth Anger. So when I would go there, I never saw Kenneth in his own, in the rented front part, but Samson I knew, and believe it or not, my mother, who creeps into every story, Samson was a good friend of my father's, but he was also a friend of my mother's. Now my mother was, you know, we all think of her as this, like, you know, Betsy Bloomingdale, but no, my mother also knew very, very interesting characters. Some through my father, many not through him, but through other channels of hers, you know, going deep into her prehistoric era here in Los Angeles. So Samson, she was tight with Samson. But prior to this, like I said, Hollywood, notables were known for hanging out with Samson in this salon of his in the back of this property where I used to go with my mother, because he was by the time I was going there, it was really like a pile of trash. It was beautiful trash. I mean, stuff you'll never see anywhere. You know, he gifted me some books and an item or two before his passing. Oh God, what was that? I think early 2000s? Yeah, 2003, I think he passed. I'm pretty sure. So, so then there's also this director named Curtis Harrington, who's not really kind of tied too tightly into this, but he directed my dad in his first film. He was there in the waiting room when I was born, and he was an extremely close member of my family and my father and my mother's. Curtis, as a director, knew Samson, Samson knew Curtis, Curtis knew Kenneth, Kenneth knew Samson, Samson knew Kenneth, etc., etc. Now, there's another player named, Marjorie Cameron. She was known as Cameron. She was, again, a notable figure, but a witch. Some could argue that Samson was a warlock. You know, these are just words. It's the degree to which you know of the occult and to which you practice the occult, such as it were. I knew Cameron, but I only knew her as this freaky old lady that lived off Santa Monica Boulevard that we would visit with my dad, with her daughter KRYSTAL, who was also an occultist or became one. I was a child. So I knew Cameron, but she was just this, I hate to say it, it's this weird, scrappy old lady. But if you Wikipedia her, I mean, there is deep, 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 deep history on this woman. I knew